central banks are just one of the buyers in this situation. There is very big money, in my opinion, in places like the Middle East, which is moving into gold. The valuation of currencies against gold is really the thing that you need to look at. And a rising gold price isn't actually a rising gold price, it's a falling value for the currencies that you're measuring it in. And that, I think, one has to remember. I think that it is interesting that we have returned to the situation where we had in the 1970s, where the relationship between bond yields and gold was higher bond yields, higher gold.
Central banks accumulated gold at the fastest pace on record in the first 2 months of 2023, according to a report by the World Gold Council. In January and February, central banks collectively bought a net 125 tons of the metal, the highest amount for the year since banks became net buyers in 2010. The countries reporting the most significant purchases in the first 2 months were Singapore, 51.4 tons, Turkey, 45.5 tons, China, 39.8 tons, Russia, 31.1 tons, and India, 2.8 tons. According to recent data from the World Gold Council, central banks acquired an additional 77 tons of gold last month. While this might not seem significant in the larger context, central banks are just one segment of the gold market. Alasdair Macleod points out substantial interest in gold, particularly from regions like the Middle East, which he attributed to historical tensions with Western powers, particularly the United States. The Chinese central bank has been on a gold buying spree. As of the end of August, the People's Bank of China had bought gold for 10 straight months and ranked as the largest central bank gold buyer this year. As of the end of August, the People's Bank of China officially held 2,165 tons of gold, making up 4% of its total reserves. Alasdair speculates that China might accumulate gold in substantial quantities, potentially exceeding 30,000 tons. He suggests that China assesses the situation critically, indicating a possible concern about destabilizing the Western-based G7 credit system. Alasdair stresses the importance of currency valuation regarding the rise in gold prices. A higher gold price doesn't always mean gold is becoming more valuable. It often signifies a drop in the value of the measured currencies. He pointed to the 1970s when higher bond yields didn't decrease gold prices. Instead, they rose together, challenging common assumptions. We will bring you clips from Alasdair Macleod's interview with Liberty and Finance, but before we do, if you want more videos like this, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for more updates. Thank you, and enjoy the video.
We see that central banks are still trying to mop up the markets, trying to take any physical gold they can get hold of. Last month, according to World Gold Council figures, central banks bought another 77 tons. Now, that might not seem a lot in the overall scheme of things, but central banks are just one of the buyers in this situation. There is very big money, in my opinion, in places like the Middle East, which is moving into gold because I hate to say this, but many, many years of bossing the Arabs around, we are not popular in the Middle East. I mean, Americans are very unpopular. We are probably tolerated, if I can put it that way. The Europeans, they've never really been into it. It's really been America and us. I just think that the demand side is really ramping up. Now, there is another aspect to this, and that is back in, I think it was in June, the Chinese government instructed the state-owned or state-controlled banks to offer facilities to account holders to swap deposits into gold. And the thing that's interesting is that this is angled at even the poorest in society, the poorest who have bank accounts, obviously. So why is China doing this? I mean, it's not as if China is she's got no interest in ramping up the price of gold, as it were. I mean, okay, in my opinion, she's probably got about 30,000 tons, could be more, hidden in various accounts like, the People's Liberation Army, the Communist Party, the youth wing of the Communist Party, and so on. Hidden, if you like, from the reserves which are declared on the balance sheet of the People's Bank of China. I think that one thing that could be the case is that China analyzes the situation just the same as I do. We sit here and try and work it out, and you as well. And I think that China has probably come to the conclusion that the whole of the Western-based, the G7 credit system is becoming destabilized. I think that it is interesting that we have returned to the situation where we had in the 1970s, where the relationship between bond yields and gold was higher bond yields, higher gold. I mean, we went into the 1970s with a Fed funds rate around about 6%. It subsequently dipped to about 3.25%, I think. 1971, 72 maybe, and gold was $35. We came out of that decade with gold looking $850 on one fix, and the Fed funds rate was like 19. So the idea that bond yields and gold are inversely related is completely wrong. I mean, and there are very, very good reasons why that is the case. If you worry about the stability of credit, then you go for gold. If you're not worried about the stability of credit, then you go for bonds. I mean, it's actually as simple as that.
Central banks have been steadily increasing their gold reserves, with a notable uptick in August, adding 77 tons to global official reserves. This trend is particularly pronounced among non-G7 nations, while G7 nations have largely maintained their existing gold holdings. Alasdair believes this signifies that central banks understand the actual value of gold as real money compared to everything else, which is essentially credit. Russia and China have been amassing significant gold reserves since 2010, with recent acceleration in their gold purchases. Russia's central bank, for example, updated its gold reserves, likely accumulated over several months. This accumulation of gold suggests that a gold-backed BRICS currency has potential. However, this proposal, driven by Russian interests, was not included in the BRICS agenda and was effectively vetoed by China. The most assertive stance regarding a gold-backed currency comes from Russia, which has advocated for it. Russia faces challenges with its currency and bond yields, with interest rates at unsustainable levels for a developing economy. The Russian ruble's value has significantly declined against the dollar, even in the face of higher oil prices. Let's get back to the interview.
People must have noticed, but they perhaps haven't thought it through, that central banks are very keen to acquire gold, which they see as having no counterparty risk. And they've been accelerating their gold ownership. I mean, outside the G7, this is, the G7 nations basically have just sat pat on what they've got or what they say they've got. But all the others have been, obviously running scared and adding to their gold reserves. The fact that they do this tells us that central bankers, whatever they say in public, actually do realize that gold is money and the rest is credit. So that's why they're doing it. When it comes to China's policy on gold, I think they differ very much from the Russians, who I'll come to in a moment. China takes a very long view. It doesn't want to be blamed for destabilizing other places and so on and so forth. And if you look at how she has responded to the various sort of trade tariffs and other attacks, attempts to try and stop China develop her technology and all this sort of stuff, you can see that she hasn't actually retaliated in any meaningful way. And I think this is why the new BRICS gold-backed currency, which was really devised by Russian interests, wasn't on the BRICS agenda in Johannesburg back in August. China effectively vetoed it. Now, I also know that the Indians were not at all keen, partly because they haven't really got any significant amount of gold. And also the Keynesian government are very Keynesian in their the Indian government are very Keynesian in their economic approach. So the Indians have got a bit of a problem because, they're in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They see everybody around them as accumulating gold. They don't believe in it, but they can't afford to ignore it. So, they would on margin like to acquire a bit more gold. They think it's absolutely ridiculous that their population runs out and buys gold rather than having rupees. But if you look at what happens to the value of rupees measured in gold, I mean, you get a pretty good idea who's sensible in this, and it's not the government, that's for sure. But when it comes to the more aggressive party on this, I think we're looking at Russia. It was Russia that pushed this idea, supported by various other countries, incidentally, but it didn't, if you like, cut the final draft. And I think that Russia is being put into a position with her own currency being undermined, her own bond yields looking like 13.5%, which is ruinous, really. I mean, how can you run a developing economy on that sort of interest rate? An interest rate really that fails to protect the currency, because the currency has declined from, I think it got down to up, as it were, to about 60 to the dollar, and it's now down to close to 100 to the dollar, 1 cent, 1 ruble. I mean, this has been a very weak currency over the last 18 months. And that's a situation which is not going to be reversed with higher oil prices.
In 2022, central banks saw their highest gold demand in 55 years, adding 1,136 tons to global reserves, an 18% increase, totaling 4,741 tons by year end. The first half of the year saw record-breaking purchases of 387 tons. This surge highlights gold's enduring significance in the global financial landscape. What are your thoughts on the interview? Share your observations in the comments section below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.